Hi everybody, and welcome to my next video instalment on creating great places to work. Today I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Tim of Make Work Work Better. Hi Tim, welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. Now I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
So Make Work Work Better, a process and productivity consultancy, training, and I believe that workplace well-being is kind of too remedial. So my kind of mission is to transform corporate well-being to actually really concentrate on the work. So if you think about, if you were a person who lifts heavy things for a living, then you get taught how to lift heavy things without hurting yourself. And we kind of don't have an equivalent for that in knowledge work. And so my approach is through process redesign and team cohesion and personal productivity, enable people to manage their own work more effectively, but also to, where necessary, restructure and redesign the work so that it's not harmful, so that people are able to do their best work. Because people who do good work are generally happier, and people who are happier are generally better employees. So it's kind of a cycle, but it's a virtuous cycle.
It's a really interesting perspective actually, and really refreshing to hear, because there's a lot of noise going on in the wellbeing industry at the moment, and like you say, a lot of it is trying to fix things after things have gone wrong rather than trying to prevent them in the first place. So I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation. So I wonder if you could tell me what you think makes a great place to work.
So I think, there's a lot of things that come together to make somewhere a great place to work. Predominantly, if you've got a good group of people who care about what they're doing, then it will always feel like it's a good place to work. It's more motivating if people feel like it's if there's a team of people all pulling in the same direction. I think also it's really important that people feel like they have some kind of agency over their work. That's the idea that you are able to make a difference. And I think that's possible regardless of the size of the organisation, as long as you understand how your role plays into the purpose of the business. So to start with, you've got to understand what the purpose or the mission of the business is. Then you've got to understand how what you do contributes to that. And then you need to have an opportunity to do that in the best way you possibly can. So use your skills, use your ability to drive change, or to drive productivity, or to crank widgets, whatever it is you do, and also do it and have the opportunity to get better at that and to learn and get better at that. So I think I don't know if you read Drive by Dan Pink.
I haven't. It's on my reading list, but I've not read it yet.
Yeah, that summarizes this whole idea. So he talks about mastery, autonomy, and purpose as being like the three things that drive motivation. And when I read that, it's really it kind of like something clicked for me. Like, yeah, actually, when I feel like I'm having an opportunity to do something well in service of a bigger goal, and I'm able to make my own decisions about how I do that, it makes me feel valued and it makes me enjoy what I'm doing. And I think if you can create that environment and that experience for employees, then you can't help but create an exciting and worthwhile place to work.
That's really interesting. Thank you for that. It ties in quite well with the Health and Safety Executives Management Standards as well, where they set out these areas which cause employee stress. And the biggest ones are lack of control, lack of certainty about what they're supposed to be doing. So it's really interesting that you've picked up on those points, because I think that they're definitely big concerns for employers to take seriously. So what can you do to help improve employee well-being?
So my approach is, I'll take a step back actually. So my last corporate role, I worked in continuous improvement for a large market research company. And we rolled out, me and my small team rolled out a lean transformation across an operations department. And that was ostensibly to improve business outcomes. So to make things happen faster, or to make things happen cheaper, or to make things happen with higher quality and better client impact and so on and so forth. But what I was really struck by was the difference it made to individuals. So we saw teams start to function more effectively together. We saw teams of people who had previously kind of flown under the radar a little bit from a point of view of their impact really start to do some things, change some things in the way they work that had further reaching implications for the business. And we saw people who were, self-described quiet people who were maybe in teams of more extrovert individuals, actually finding that they had a voice and starting to blossom a little bit and take on more responsibility and step up to the plate a little bit more. So that's what really interested me about. That was a kind of side effect of the program that we ran. So when I started Make Work Work Better, I was really interested in this gap between well-being as the way it's thought of currently a lot of the time in corporate life, where it's okay, you're stressed, here's some fruit, or we're yoga Wednesdays, mindfulness Mondays, EAPs, all of that stuff. They're all super important, and I wouldn't want to belittle anybody who finds those things helpful or who delivers those things in corporate work, because they are important. But when you get back from your lunchtime yoga in a meeting room and you've got a full inbox and you've got crazy deadlines and people knocking on your door constantly asking for things, I think the help that's going to give you, the respite that's going to give you, is kind of short-lived. I think the HSE stats for work-related sickness absence for about the last 2 or 3 years, 25% of sick days, work-related sick days, were down to stress, anxiety, or depression caused by workload. So my mission is to support well-being in organisations by helping individuals adopt better individual working practices, and that's something I lived through. I was one of those people who was promoted to being a manager because I was good at something else, and had no real sense of how to go about it. I had no real idea what to expect. I had no tools to manage the new demands on my time. And that was when I first discovered Getting Things Done, which is which kind of, it sounds a bit over the top to say it changed my life, but it genuinely did. It took me from being somebody who was genuinely extremely stressed, overwhelmed, grumpy. I'm awful when I'm stressed. I'm a really snappy, grumpy person, and actually being able to get a bit of distance, get a bit of perspective, get things into control through adopting habits that have reliable outcomes made a massive difference to me. And that kind of became the way that I work for, subsequent 15 years. And so I like the idea of being able to pass that on to people, to give them those skills, get their inbox to zero, to manage the various inputs that come into their life, to be able to make decisions about what they work on next, as opposed to just, this important person is shouting, I'd better do that. Yeah. And so that's kind of one angle from an individual perspective, that I think just by giving people tools to manage their commitments, you can make them feel better about what they're taking on and be more intentional about what they're taking on. That also has an impact on their ability to relax and their ability to switch off. So one of the things that David Allen says in Getting Things Done is that you can only feel good about what you're not doing when you know what you're not doing. And so there's this idea that if you want to switch off and you want to entirely switch off, you need to be really clear on that that's a conscious thing. It's not just something it's sometimes the most important, most productive thing to do is sit down and have a biscuit. But you're not going to enjoy sitting down and have a biscuit and getting all the benefit out of sitting down and having a biscuit unless you are comfortable with the fact that you're not doing the 5 other things that you could potentially be doing at that time. And there's nothing worse than that feeling when you've accidentally just been not doing something. You find you've been scrolling Twitter for 20 minutes, like we all do, and then you suddenly go, oh, I'm supposed to send that email to Dave and I've not done. And that's an awful feeling, because you feel like you've just wasted a whole chunk of your life when you should have been being productive. But so being able to make those decisions consciously about, okay, I'm spending my time doing this, it's a better way to use your time, and also it removes those kind of like horrible, stressful, you want the world to swallow you up kind of feelings. And then from a business point of view, things like how teams work together and how processes work has huge impact on how people feel about their work. If you don't feel that the work you're doing is valuable, then you're not going to feel good about doing it.
I think at the moment as well, we've got a potential problem where a lot of not everybody, but a lot of people are working at home, and there's those blurred boundaries between work and home, and it's very easy to get very caught up in just working and not switching off. So like you say, you don't have that mental downtime, because you're always thinking about what else is on your to-do list, or the demands being placed on you perhaps by a boss or a client. And it tends to be, or people tend to react to whoever's shouting the loudest, whether that's actually genuinely the most important or urgent thing to do. So I think these are really, really useful skills that, people can learn. But I think it goes back to also the culture within a business. So if you've got that kind of culture where you're expected to work long hours and you're expected to just respond to a demanding boss or a demanding client, no matter what time of day or night, or whether it's at the weekend, that can be really damaging. And one of the things I'm really passionate about as part of creating great places to work is actually looking at the workplace culture. So how does what you do help to build a better culture within organisations?
So probably the best example will be thinking about a team of people, and often we have teams, and especially if you think about this last year where teams have been disparate and scattered about, so it's made it more obvious. But more often than not, I think, especially in large organisations, teams tend to be collections of individuals with different jobs that slot together somehow, and there's less of there's not often transparency around what everybody actually does and how everybody's getting on. There's often not a really good sense of shared ownership of problems and of a kind of shared goal within a team. So if you were to sit down with a lot of teams in businesses, okay, what are you here to do? They could probably tell you what they each did individually, but like the goal of the team might be something that they'd struggle to articulate. And so a lot of the work that I do around the team cohesion and process redesign is about taking the people who are within the work, within the process, if you like, and asking what they think of it. So giving them that agency. What is it you do? What gets in your way? What support do you need? And then on a daily, frequent basis, giving them that voice to say within the team, okay, I'm worried about this thing. Here is something that I don't think we thought about. Here is something that I don't feel supported in. This is a concern for me. And whether that be, I think increasingly over the last year, 18 months, we've been thinking about that more in terms of the personal impact of things on people as equally as, how that's going to affect delivery in the business. Actually asking how people are has become more important this last year. So I think because when you start to build teams like that, when you start to build teams who pitch in with each other, who share information, who actually understand how what they do impacts somebody else, and how what that person does impacts the next person on the line, you start to get a much more and teams start to function at a slightly higher level, because they're not just thinking about what they do themselves. And from a cultural point of view, it means that everybody's driving towards that purpose. I mean, I don't think you can have a good culture in a business without having a purpose that everybody understands and is clear on. Because also that helps you with your decision making. If you have to make a decision and you've got a good sense of this is why the company exists, this is what's important to the company, these are the company values, I have a decision to make, no matter what level you are in the business, if you've got a good understanding of those things, it becomes easier to work out what's the right decision to make. And if you trust people to make good decisions, then you can give them more autonomy, and then they become more engaged in their job, and then they become happier, and we have, again, a virtuous cycle. So for me, a lot of it comes down to culture. For me, is about where the expectations of the leadership meet the experience of the employees, and that what happens when those two things collide is what your culture is. And if they're massively out of whack, then you will have a culture that doesn't fire. And if those two things gel, then you'll have a culture that moves at pace. So I think, yeah, it's getting that right.
It's really interesting. Thank you for that. And I have another question for you. You mentioned then about the values. I mean, how important do you think it is for companies to sort of define those values so that employees can get on board with those values and adopt all of those, so that, you know, that they're really sort of bringing that culture together based on shared values?
I think it's really important. I think it takes a lot of work, and it's a lot of work that should be done to make those values real things, as opposed to just like words on a screensaver. My work would generally, the way that would fit into that kind of into that structure would be thinking about the behaviors that you want to encourage as a part of those values, and then working out what measurements you need to have in place in order to encourage the right behaviors, because we will behave how we are measured, you know. And so you need to be careful when you put measures in place in order to make sure that you're not encouraging poor behavior by pushing someone towards a particular outcome. And if you've got a good understanding of the values, and if everyone in your organization understands and believes in what those values, understands why they exist, believes that they're important, then actually, from a point of view of creating measurement for your teams, you can start to say, okay, so how do we do this say one of your values is to be innovative. Okay, well, you want to be encouraging people to do new things, you know, and so you don't want to be measuring them on, you want to have leeway in your measurement to enable people to do new things and take risks. Because if you're only measuring them on traditional standard outputs, then where's the incentive to them to take those risks and be innovative, for example?
When you put it like that, it's so simple, isn't it? But people overlook this stuff.
Exactly, and I think it's really important that the stated values match what's going on the ground. And also, I think it's really, really important that leadership live those values. It's all very well saying these things are important to us, but leadership need to be seen to be doing it at the same time and explaining why it's important. You can, and especially if people go with really big words. You know, if you go with really big words, then you need to make them relevant to the people who do the work and explain why I don't know, excitable. One that I remember. Okay, so how does being excitable help? Why have we chosen excitable? I really enjoyed. There was a talk I saw from the head of keeping people happy at Ella's Kitchen, and I really loved that their values are really central about reminding everybody in the organization that their customers are the children, not the parents. So everything that they do as around their values is about encouraging playfulness and clarity, and making it so that actually, if you were speaking to one of the children who you make food for, they would understand what you do. And you know, it's not for everybody. I can't imagine Goldman Sachs are ever going to go down that route, but I really like the idea that they live that, and they live it right down to their job titles. You know, the finance department is called sums, and it's just and every part of what they do is linked to that central value that we are doing this for these kids. And I think that's a really good example of how you can then, as an employee, make a decision about something because you understand the values and the direction the company's going in. And it will inform what you do in your day-to-day work. That's the reason that you have values, right? Because you want to guide people in how they behave and how they respond to things and how they act while they're at work.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing all of those thoughts with us. I'm sure all of our viewers will love some of the things you've shared there. So I've got my final question for you. It's the question that I ask everybody. Now, I usually ask people, what's the best book you've read in the last year or so? But I know you and I were speaking before this. I know you're an avid reader. So I guess my question to you might be, what's the best book that you've read in relation to this kind of stuff, this creating great places to work?
Okay. Well, I'm always going to mention Getting Things Done because it was a transformative book for me, and it's something that I think is really, you can learn to be organised. Even if you're not an organised person, it's something that you can learn. And so that for me is that's always going to be a book that I'm going to. I've given away more copies of this book than I would care to admit.
You have sent one to me, and I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Lovely. I was in Works, the discount bookshop, the Works.
Yeah.
I was in there a few years ago, and it was just before the version of the book that you've got there came out. So obviously, like, the bookshop was getting rid of all the old copies of the book, and they had a shelf full for like £1 a pop. And I just bought all of them and just gave them to people. I was awful. So that would always, in terms of books that have had an influence on me, that would always be up there. Also, Mindset by Carol Dweck, found from a more recent point of view, I found that absolutely, it fundamentally changed the way that I thought about parenting. It fundamentally changed the way that I thought about giving feedback to my team, and it really gave me a kick to push myself out of my comfort zone a little bit more. So yeah, more recently, I'd say Mindset by Carol Dweck. And just from a lockdown perspective as well, the Mick Herron Slough House books, which are a series of books about like failed spies who are all like sent off to this like awful place to do awful jobs in the hope that they will quit. And there's like 7 books or something, and they are amazing. And they have been kind of my, I'm not going to say guilty pleasure because they're brilliantly written, but they've been my kind of fictional support through lockdown. I tore through them in the first lockdown. And so I'd highly recommend those for a dose of just like good, slightly sweary, funny, bitter, dark, sarcastic, interesting, also work-related fiction.
Okay, good. I mean, we can all do with a bit of escapism at the moment, so
right.
I'll look them up, and I'll maybe buy them and add them to my reading list, so I can maybe read something other than just sort of business books, maybe just something that's reading a bit more for pleasure.
I think it's important. I think when you do the kind of things that we do, then there's always something else that somebody's recommending you to read, and I think it's very easy to just find that you're finishing work for the day and switching off your screens, and then before you go and look at the big screen for an hour before you go to bed, you want to stop looking at screens, so you pick up a book, and you pick up books that are in some way related to work, and your brain isn't switching off from work at all. And I think we can learn things from fiction. Fiction teaches us about language. Fiction teaches us about human condition. Fiction just gives us different ways of looking at things. And so I think it's really important I try and squeeze in a fiction book between every non-fiction book that I read at a minute, just as a kind of palate cleanser. I think it's important.
Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. And yes, thank you.
Not at all. Thank you for having me.